Hello, I'm ANEKA from Made to Sew and welcome to my dart manipulation tutorial. And this tutorial is going to be a how-to. I'm going to be showing you how to manipulate darts around your pattern. I'm working with my free Copen pattern and I'm going to be sharing tips for changing the location of the darts. We're going to be looking at standard locations first so that you understand the process, and then you can have a go moving your darts to different locations. I would always recommend creating a calico toile, sample garment, muslin, whatever you want to call it, just because you want to check that you're happy with the placement of your new darts. So without further ado, collect up your pattern and your pattern cutting supplies and we can begin. Now throughout this tutorial, I'm going to be working with my free Copen pattern. However, you are welcome to work with any pattern that you want to, or even a block owl sloper. If you would like to download the Copen pattern to follow along, then I will pop a link here. Now the Copen pattern has a bust dart and a waist dart. Throughout this tutorial, I'm going to be ignoring the waist dart. The waist dart is optional in the Copen pattern, and by using it or by sewing it, you would create a closer fit in the waist or midriff area. We're just going to be working with the side dart that we have got here. Now it doesn't matter if your starting pattern has a side dart or a dart in another location. The dart manipulation rules that we're going to discuss are going to be the same. I have gone ahead and traced off my Copen pattern onto some heavier weight card. The only reason I've done this is because when we start cutting things up in a second, this is going to last and be a little bit more durable. However, I would normally just work on paper, so please don't worry about having to put it onto card like I'm doing here. This is simply for ease in the tutorial. Now the method of dart manipulation that we're going to do here is a method that's called slash and spread or cut and spread. There is also another method called the pivot method. Personally, I believe the slash and spread or cut and spread method is easier. It is also easier when you're working with an existing garment, so perhaps a pattern like this. The pivot method is a method that I would use when I'm starting to design something with my block or sloper. If you would be interested in seeing that method, I can do a tutorial in the future. Now, the first decision you need to make when you are considering dart manipulation is where is the pivot point of the dart going to be? Now the pivot point is going to be the central point where the darts will connect to so that you can move them around the pattern. At the moment I've got a side dart here. I might want to move this into the armhole, into the shoulder or into the centre front. And my pivot point is going to be the sort of central point of the circle where I can shift all of that dart volume. I promise it will make more sense as we continue throughout the tutorial. Now, if you'd watched my What is Darts tutorial, you will understand that darts point towards the full areas of the body or the curves of the body. Therefore, the area that you choose as the pivot point should be an area that is curved on the body. Generally, and when you're a beginner, I would recommend always going with your bust point or bust apex or around this area. Now the bust point or bust apex is marked on my Copen pattern. It may or may not be marked on your pattern, and I will be filming a tutorial that will show you how to find out where the bust point is on a pattern in the coming weeks. The key though is that you need to work with the bust point that is the same as your bust point. So I would recommend making a sample of the Copen pattern first and comparing your bust point to the bust point on the pattern. Now, the bust point or bust apex should be the fullest part of your bust around the nipple area. Now, you will see here that the original dart is actually backed away from the bust point, and this is the case of the majority of darts in patterns, and we'll discuss this again a little bit later. Therefore, I will need to connect my original dart legs to the bust point or the pivot point of your choosing. Now, I also want to add that you could decide for your pivot point to be somewhere else. And this is a case, perhaps if you're trying to design something really wacky, you want to put volume in an area of the body that doesn't really have curves, then by all means you could have a play with your pivot point. There isn't a right or wrong answer here, but for a standard garment, I would recommend starting with your bust apex, bust point, or in the vicinity of that bust point. Now, it doesn't matter if you are working on a pattern that has seam allowances or that doesn't have seam allowances. Dart manipulation works with both methods. However, you will always need to remember to true your dart when you have finished. So I've started by marking on some design ideas for you. Now, the original dart is here in red. And I've started to think about some of the classic placements for dart manipulation, and that's what these black lines all are. Areas that you could send the dart if you wanted to. And this is where it gets quite fun, because as the designer, you can really send the dart volume in dart manipulation wherever you want. These black lines are just some classic ideas. They all connect to the pivot point that we decided was going to be the bust point or bust apex in this example. As I mentioned, your pivot point might be slightly different to this. Now, you also need to consider when you're moving your dart that you could move it to another location and you don't have to sew it as a dart in the new location. You could have something that's called dart equivalence. And if you watched my What is Dart Manipulation tutorial, I briefly touched on dart equivalence. So dart equivalent is using up the volume that goes into the dart, but rather than sewing a dart, you're using that volume in a different way. So you'd be sewing gathers, you'd be sewing pleats or tucks, or perhaps even creating a cowl neck. So let's start by looking at some sort of classic places that you can send this dart volume from the side seam. You could send it to the centre front here. So this is straight in line with the bust point. You could send it up to the corner up here, which is actually your centre front neck. And you've got to remember here that we are working on one half of the body. So whatever you do on this side will be mirrored on the other side. That's not to say you have to do the same thing on both sides. You could put a seam up the centre front and you could do something different on the other side. Or you could do this rather than working on half of the front, you could have one full pattern piece and work on the whole of the front at the same time. And that's how you get sort of asymmetrical designs, like you saw in my pink dress at the start of the tutorial. Another option is to send the dart to the shoulder. At the shoulder, you can pick the placement that you want to send it. You could go with the center shoulder, which is this line here. You could send it up to where the neck and the shoulder meet. Or you could do the other side and send it up to where the armhole and the shoulder meet. You could also send it anywhere along the neckline, anywhere along the armhole line, or to a different location along the side. This dart, if I slide that up so you can see, is actually slightly off a right angle along the side. I've pointed it down ever so slightly because I feel that's a little bit more flattering. However, you could send it back to a right angle at the side seam if that works better on your figure, or you could send it further down the side seam, and this is where it starts to become a French dart. So there are many options, and as I said, you can really place the dart where you want as the designer. So have a think about it, and then we can get started and I can show you how to manipulate the original red dart into one of the other locations. Now with your pattern, you're not going to have all these lines that I've got here, but I just wanted to show you what happens when I manipulate the dart into these different locations. For your pattern, you're going to want to pick one line where you want to manipulate the dart, and then you're going to do the following. We need to cut along one of the original legs of the dart, up to the point, but not through the point. So, taking my paper scissors, I'm going to cut along one of these legs. It doesn't really matter which because we are going to be closing the original dart. So I'm going to cut all the way up, right up to that point. And you do need to make sure you really get into the point there so that, as this is called, we can pivot the dart. Now I need to pick the line where I want to send the dart. So I'm going to start with this centre front one here. I'm going to cut along the new line that I have drawn, again making sure that I cut right up to that pivot point, but not through. You need to make sure that there is a tiny, tiny little bit of paper that connects them at that pivot point so that we can pivot the dart closed along the side seam, because we don't want that dart anymore, and we have created a new dart at the center front. If your paper doesn't pivot nicely, then you need to cut a little bit closer. Obviously, the idea is that the paper stays connected and you don't cut through, because then your pattern pieces will be separated. And that is all there is to dart manipulation. Let me show you what it looks like if we cut along some of the other lines. And this is the reason why I was using card here, because I have gone ahead and cut down all of my lines that I was showing you as options, because I wanted to show you what happens if we use dart manipulation to move the dart into another location. Obviously, you won't be cutting down all of the lines, you'll be choosing your locations where you want to send your dart and sending it to those locations. Keep sellotape on hand just to make sure that this little pivot point, especially when I've cut down all of these lines, isn't going anywhere. So let's have a play. So as I showed you before, we can manipulate the darts to give us a dart at the center front edge. We could pivot that around again and we would be given a dart at the center front neck. If I pivot this around again, we have got a dart where the shoulder meets the neck. Again, gives us a dart in the middle of the shoulder. And again, gives us a dart in the armhole. And you will see that as we move the dart to a new location, the shape of the dart, the size of the dart does change. However, this isn't amending the fit of the garment in any way. We are simply amending the style lines or the design lines of the garment. Again, we could close the armhole. So we're back to having a side dart that is at a right angle now to the bust point. And finally, I could move those up and you will see we have a French dart. Now, if you're moving your dart a small distance, you may have this problem too, so I'm glad it's come up. Can you see underneath here that I have a bit of red from my original dart? You must ignore this. The line for the new dart is the edge of this piece of paper that you cut along and the edge of your cutting line here. It's simply because the width of that original dart is greater than the distance of the move of the dart. So when we slide that up, we've still got a little bit of dart underneath, but that dart is gone now. Our new dart is here. So I've now gone ahead and actually taped my other cut lines closed. As I said, that was just for demonstration. And I've decided to position my new dart into the center of the shoulder. Now I'm going to go back to my paper coping pattern so that I can show you how to decide on the dart point or apex, the end of the dart. So as you can see here, I'm back with my paper pattern and I did exactly the same as to what I did in the card. I manipulated my dart from its current position up into the center of the shoulder. I now need to put a bit of paper behind this so that we can fill this new dart in. And I'm going to tape this in place. Okay, so my scrap of paper is taped in place and I've just gone over the edges of the original pattern with red. You wouldn't need to do this, it's just so that you can clearly see where my opening was and the bit of scrap paper that I've popped in the middle. Now obviously my plan here is to have a dart. If you were thinking about having a dart equivalent, we discussed this, it would be gathers, pleats, tucks. whatever it is that you're planning on working with, then you wouldn't obviously follow this process. You would need to be drafting yourself your pleats or tucks or whatever it was that you would be working with. However, I'm planning on having a dart at the centre of my shoulder. So I need to decide on how close I want the dart to come to my bust apex or my pivot point. As we discussed, your pivot point might not be the same as your bust apex, but it will be close to. You may already have the end of the dart in the right place for you. However, if you have gone right up to the bust apex, you will need to what's called back the dart off slightly. Now, the issue with how much you back the dart off by depends on your individual figure. So the first thing we're going to do is to find the centre line of the dart. To do that, we need to measure the opening at the top edge. How much or how large is this dart? So I've marked what I believe to be my centre line, and I'm going to connect that back up to my pivot point, in this case, my bust point. So I now have the central line of the dart. And now we can discuss how much the dart point or dart apex needs to be moved back from the bust point or bust apex. I would suggest that the standard amount is 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres. That's for dresses, tops, fitted jackets. If you have perhaps a looser jacket or a coat or something like that, then you would back it off even more by perhaps about 2 inches, 5 centimetres. There is also rules and discussions about the size of the bust. Often people will suggest that the larger the bust size, the greater the distance you need to back off your dart by. However, from personal experience, I would suggest that it depends on the shape of your bust. And this is where the whole part of sort of backing off the dart is a little bit of a question mark, because it depends on you. Obviously, there are standards, as I said, the 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres, but it depends on the shape of the bust, the bra that you wear, and how the dart actually fits on your body. So I would recommend making up a sample garment, that's the toile or muslin of your garment, and to see how that dart is sitting on your figure. If the dart is too close, then you might have a little bit of a peak to the end of the dart. It will look like there's empty space at the end of the dart, and therefore you need to back it away a little bit. However, on the other hand, if the dart is too far away, you might find that it sort of looks like it's straining over the fullest part of your bust. As I said, it depends on the shape of your bust, because darts should be pointing towards the fullest part of the figure. Some people have more of a fuller side of the bust, some people are more rounded, some people are flatter. Depends on you, and also depends on that bra that you wear. So basically, make up a sample and check it on yourself. For this example, I'm going to be backing it away by the 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres. Gone to blue Sharpie now, so that you can see the new dart lines that we're going to be drawing. So I'm measuring back the 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres from the bust point, and I have marked that on. That's going to be the end of my dart. And now I'm going to draw from the new dart apex or dart point, the new legs, and I'm drawing those to where the paper opened up. That hasn't changed, it's just the point that has changed. There we go. So the blue marking is our new dart. Now, by moving the dart apex back slightly, we're just giving it a little bit more ease over the bust area. As I said, this might not be right for your bust and your individual shape, so do check it in a calico or muslin before making your final garment. The final thing you need to do if you have relocated your dart or manipulated your dart to a new place is to what's called true the dart. You will always need to do this whenever you make any changes to your pattern, the seam that the darts are on, or the darts themselves. You need to true the darts to check that they're going to sew together correctly on the pattern. I'm going to do another tutorial that will show you how to true the dart, and that will be up next week. The other thing that you might need to consider is how large your dart is. If your dart is exceptionally large, you may decide to actually make the dart a seam instead so that you don't have the dart volume, or to perhaps make it into two darts. These are other options that I will be covering in future tutorials. As I mentioned in my What is Dart Manipulation tutorial, I also discussed using this technique for helping to correct certain fitting issues, be that gaping in the armhole or the neckline. You would use the same method of dart manipulation, but you would actually be adding unwanted fabric from the gaping neckline or the gaping armhole into an already existing dart. You could still use dart manipulation to move that dart to another location, but you'll generally be dumping it into the already existing dart. Now I've decided to film a separate tutorial that will show you how to fix the issues of the gaping armhole and neckline with dart manipulation through the whole process, from pinning it on a mannequin to adjusting it in flat pattern cutting. Thanks for watching. I really hope that you have a bit more of an understanding about pattern cutting and that you feel confident about manipulating your darts in the future. I wish you all the best with your sewing and see you soon.